Welcome back to Untaming Masculinity, the podcast where we tackle issues relevant to men and their journeys to reclaim their masculinity. I'm Dan, and as always, I'm joined by my co-host and good friend Brad. How we doing this morning?
Doing great, man. Just woke up feeling like I got hit by a train because I didn't get nearly enough sleep. So just sitting here getting myself up and ready for the day. But we've just come out here in Salt Lake. We had some of the hottest weather on record. It hit 107 the other day, which not only was a record for September, it was an all-time record. So it's mercifully started cooling down. So I'm kind of enjoying that because it's been rough, man. But anyways, how are you doing?
Yeah, doing pretty good. It's been for a short week at work. It was a long week, if that makes sense. So got a little recovery plan for the weekend, and then school is starting up too. So entering the final stages of the MBA program here. So I'm happy to get going.
The home stretch.
I think by this time next year, I will be done. So I'm very happy. Today's episode is going to be it's going to be interesting because it's, I'll say, less tactical and more strategic. So I'm going to let you jump in a little bit here and give us an overview, and we'll get going. Yesterday,
I had two very interesting experiences that kind of set the framework for what we want to talk about. Within, as we've talked about, we are members of a group called the Iron Council. And within the Iron Council, there are battle teams. And our mutual friend Cam and I are part of the battle team leadership group of a team. And we made the decision to remove somebody from the team yesterday for various reasons. Don't need to necessarily go into those reasons, but we had a phone call with this individual, let him know that he wasn't holding up his end of the bargain, wasn't up to standard, wasn't making good decisions. And he didn't respond until late Friday night when he sent a very long message saying that he felt betrayed and that we had completely done this and for nefarious reasons. So I took some time to articulate a message to him to go into some depth about what the decision was, what I'm hoping for him next steps. And he responded in a very aggressive, hostile manner. He was very upset. Obviously he was wounded. He felt betrayed. He felt hurt. And he resorted to a lot of personal jabs. And it got very emotional and it got very heated from his perspective. And I saw myself being drawn into wanting to get into mudslinging and wanting to throw out attacks. I was very drawn into wanting to have an emotional response, seeing him and his emotional response and the insults. And, this is somebody I built a relationship with for the last 2 years. And he was coming at me full force. And it really brought me to this idea of us letting our emotions get the best of us. And to further that point, I get a text from my wife a couple hours later, said, "Hey, our daughter on her bus ride home today was threatened to be shot by her bus driver." And there's a video on the YouTube, or not on YouTube, on the Facebook page for our community that one of the kids had happened to record where the bus driver missed the stop, started aggressively yelling at the kids and said, "If you don't stop talking, I'm going to shoot you, all of you." And it was yet another example of somebody allowing their emotions to get the best of them, to make irrational decisions. So I guess, Dan, to kick it off, why do so many people let their emotions get the best of them?
The first thing that comes to mind is that it's not a thought out response. It's like, to use the word I always hate to use the same word in the definition, but it's an emotional response, right? It's an emotional, you're going off your feelings, you're going off of just what is brewing to the surface, as opposed to taking any time to really kind of take a breath, think about the situation, and react in a reasonable manner. I'm absolutely guilty of it too. I'm sure you've had situations where you've done this as well, but it's very easy to pop off and just say what's on your mind, as opposed to actually thinking through the situation and coming back with a well thought out response. I don't know the science behind it. I don't know the psychological whys and hows of how it works, but I would say that in general, it's a lack of self-awareness in that moment that causes people to have such emotional responses.
Yeah. So emotions, they're important. If you actually read about emotions and why we have them, it's very interesting. There's a line that sums it up in a psychology article. It said emotions are influenced by a network of interconnected structures in the brain that make up what is known as the limbic system. And the reason we have this limbic system is if you go back from an evolutionary perspective to, when we were living in caves and when we were terrorized by woolly mammoths and saber-toothed tigers, that emotions helped us to take action, to survive, to avoid danger. Like they're essentially our warning system, if you will, from an evolutionary perspective that something was off. And naturally, that warning system, it acts quickly, right? Like you think of when we get upset, where like, that hits really fast. And what's interesting is I don't remember the exact science behind it, but we lose our ability to reason and use logic the moment an emotion hits. So oftentimes we find ourselves making decisions that we later regret. Anger is a really big example of that. I get pissed off about something. First thing I want to do is I want to get back at that person that pissed me off. I want to make sure they know that they're messed up and that they pissed me off. Or if oftentimes if somebody gets scared or sad, they oftentimes make decisions to isolate themselves. And I believe that the emotion that gets us in the most trouble as men is anger, because it's when we're angry that we make rash and hasty decisions. And those decisions can have incredibly horrible consequences. You talk to most any man and you'll hear stories of how they got angry at their wife or their kids, and then they made a horrible decision they regretted. They yelled at them. They did something stupid. They stormed off. And none of those decisions that you make in the moment are ever going to serve you. You look at the destruction left in the wake of so many marriages, of so many relationships, simply because somebody acted out when they got angry. And it's disappointing. It's scary. But at the same time, it makes you really evaluate what could have been done better.
Mm-hmm. It's really interesting that you talk about anger, because that is definitely the key for me to kind of go into this like burn the boats mentality of just we're going down and I'm taking everyone with us kind of mindset. Before I started this journey that we're on in terms of self-improvement, that was my go-to. It was, oh, we're in a fight and you're upsetting me. And I think of my wife, especially, because the poor woman has borne the brunt of a lot of these arguments. It amazes me how much you can love someone and still want to hurt them at the same time. Because when we would get into an argument, it was, I'm either going to win this argument or I'm going to hurt you so much that you're not going to want to continue arguing with me. And I'm not saying that in a proud way. That I'm actually very embarrassed of that. But that was my go-to, because it was an emotional response. Over the years, and this has taken a long time, I won't say that I don't get upset. I will say that I've at least been able to trigger myself to become self-aware enough to say, you know what? We're not doing this right now. I'm walking away, which pisses her off a little bit. But it keeps me from having those emotional responses that would cause me to say something that I would regret later. It keeps me from having that just burn the bridge, hellfire and brimstone moment where I don't care. I'm just going to say whatever mean shit comes to mind, and you're going to take it, and I'm just going to win because I can be louder and nastier and whatever.
You mentioned self-awareness in there. That's as reductive as it sounds. Being able to find self-awareness when you're pissed off is key, but it's also really freaking hard.
Really hard.
Really, really hard. When you're in the moment, self-awareness, understanding, logic, all that crap goes out the window. So what happened? How did you start to get that self-awareness?
In this journey and being with, guys like we find in the Iron Council, like we find just in the groups that you and I are involved in, you read things about emotions, you read things about, emotional response, that kind of stuff. And just talking with these guys, I learned a few tips and tricks as far as just noticing when I was starting to boil up. And I also realized just through this kind of self-reflection phase, and I feel bad because there's not a lot of like tangible, like do these 5 steps and you're going to fix this problem. It's just a lot of self-thinking and introspection. But I would kind of do like a mental AAR after all of these things after a while, and realize that the start of the situation was bad. There was a reason that caused an emotional response from the two of us towards each other. But my response after that point escalated the situation, and it did not fix the situation. So the practical side of me, remember, I'm an engineer, and I think very logically, sometimes to my detriment. The practical side of me said, okay, that's wasted energy. That's a wasted situation. Remove yourself from that situation and then come back to it when you're not as heated. And it's a really hard thing to do, really, really hard thing to do, especially the first couple of times. And it's also really hard for the other person because they're not used to you having that response. They're all of a sudden gearing up for that fight because that's what you've been doing for the last 5, 10, 15, 20 years, whatever it is. And all of a sudden you're saying, hey, time out. I'm going to go walk into the other room for 10 minutes, cool down. I'm going to let you cool down. And then we're going to have a civil conversation about what just happened and try to figure out this problem. It's really, 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 really hard to start. And even to this day, believe me, it's not what I want to do in the moment. In the moment, I want to go I want to go King Kong on the situation and just destroy everything. But it's not beneficial long term. So it's having that mental capacity, that self-awareness to remove yourself from the situation, spend some time by yourself, logically think through the process in your mind, and try to remove your emotion from that situation is what has benefited me in the past. I think even yesterday when you and I were talking a little bit, you were telling me about what was going on, and I think I even used the words, I said, remove your emotion from the situation and answer this question logically and tell me what you think.
Yeah.
I didn't even realize it when I was typing that, but it's like, that's exactly what I do in these situations is I try to remove myself physically from the situation, because just being in that same room causes you to not be able to remove that emotion sometimes. So if you physically go to another room, you go outside, you go somewhere else, all of a sudden I find that I can logically think through the process much better and be like, okay, listen, here's what caused the conflict. Here's why it's a conflict. Here's what's exacerbating the conflict. So how do I triage that first? And then how do I deal with the root cause in a calm, civil manner? And sometimes it's holding your ground, and sometimes it's sucking it up and admitting you were wrong. Neither one is easy, right? Because when you're holding your ground, the other person is going to think that you're not being reasonable. But when you admit that, admitting that you were wrong, that's never easy either. But if you take a logical approach to it, at least you know you're going down the right path.
Yeah. Removing yourself from the situation is the most important thing. Oftentimes it's when you want to go scorched earth, best thing to do is get the hell out of there. Get yourself in a position where you can let those feelings subside. And one of the things that I've learned is when you start to really understand emotions, and that takes a long time, but getting a general idea as to how they work, it really sets the table for you to be able to start to address them. Because there's so many times with guys when we get pissed off, it's, oh, this person made me mad. This person did this to me. You betrayed me. You made that stupid decision to spite me. It's very easy when you're angry or when you're sad, but especially when you're angry, to blame other people for that. That they somehow caused this emotion in you, that they made you mad, that they made you pissed off. It was their doing, which is total and complete bullshit. Nobody ever makes you or forces you to elicit an emotional response. That's your own doing. Understanding that, however, is something that takes some time.
Mm-hmm.
Right? It's not unnatural to have emotions. In fact, emotions are so we talked about right from the top. We've had emotions since the prehistoric days. Since day one, humans have had emotions. Anger is one of those emotions. Nobody makes us do anything. That emotion hits, and understanding that nobody else is responsible for feeling that way except you and you alone can be very eye-opening as well. As soon as you realize that person that you're really mad at they might have made a stupid decision. They might have done something that justifiably frustrates you, but they didn't make you do anything. That was your own choice. As soon as you realize that, as soon as you're able to step away, it really allows you to simply set the table for being able to let go of how you feel in that situation.
Yep.
It's an understanding, and it's really, really, really important that you understand that nobody, no matter what you think, makes you do a damn thing.
So I listen to a podcast called Manager Tools a lot for work related stuff.
Yeah.
And the guys on there, one of the guys, Mark Hortzman is his name. He's kind of the main guy. He tells a story about how he was in an elevator with his friend. And, the elevator's full, and there's people behind him, and him and his buddy get in the elevator, and they're standing in the elevator in front of a group of people, and all of a sudden, Mark starts getting poked in the back with the umbrella. And at first, he whatever, it's no big deal. But it keeps going on. He keeps getting poked in the back, and he's getting more and more upset. Finally, they get to a floor, and the guy with the umbrella says, "Excuse me," and gets off. And Mark and his buddy are alone in the elevator. And he looks at him and he goes, "Can you believe that guy? He pissed me off so much. He got me so upset." He goes, "With that stupid umbrella." And his friend just looks at him and he goes, "No, that guy, yes, he poked you with the umbrella. You got upset all on your own." And it's a story to really it simplifies exactly what you said. It's like people will do stuff to us, but our emotional response is all our own, right? How we handle that situation is all our own. It brings up an interesting tidbit that my current boss tells me all the time. He'll just look at me in any situation and he'll go, "Just remember, E+R = O." And I'm like, "What does that mean?" He goes, "Event plus reaction equals outcome." He goes, "You don't control the event." He goes, "But you know what outcome you want." He goes, "So adjust your reaction accordingly." And I'll tell you, man, you take that mentality and you apply it to work, you apply it to fatherhood, you apply it to marriage, you are going to win big time. It's not easy, like we've talked about so far, but the concept of E+R = O, where your reaction is the key part of that equation, it's a powerful, powerful tool. It's actually, we talked about it a couple episodes ago about our visions and our codes. That E+R actually shows up in my code of conduct in terms of something that I strive to constantly be evaluating.
That's awesome, man. I wrote it down. I'm going to remember that one. So it brings me back to, I can't even tell you how many times I've told you or other folks, man, that really pissed me off today.
Yep.
It's so easy to be drawn into this idea that the event elicited this reaction, so I have to be mad. And when you get pissed off, you tend to not make good decisions. I could tell you, and I'm sure you could do the same, we could sit here and tell stories for hours of when we let our emotions get the best of us and when we made stupid decisions. I could tell you the time I smashed my phone in front of my 6-year-old daughter and completely traumatized her because I was mad about some trivial something or other. We have lives filled with those stories, and it goes to show how many men simply choose the wrong path in that equation. The event happens, the reaction sucks, and the outcome is terrible.
Yeah.
Or not to go too far to one side of the extreme, but how many men are in prison right now because that reaction was that horrible? It's unbelievable.
We're talking a lot about anger here, which I think is a very masculine response to a lot of things. I think men in general have a tendency to have that kind of response to many situations. Somebody's attacking us either physically or mentally. We get angry at the situation. We get, not necessarily that we get violent, but like we bulk up and we get defensive. However that looks for you. I think the emotion that we also need to talk about is fear, because fear can elicit the same kind of response with a different result in my mind. And what I mean by that is I think about a situation we had recently here at my house with my wife. She had just finished bathing the dog. I came home from work and I had stopped at the store and I had my hands full of grocery bags. She opens the door for me and the dog scoots out. And there just happened to be a guy walking his dog on the other side of the street. My dog runs out. They get into a little tussle because my dog's an idiot and she thinks that wrestling with every dog is what you're supposed to do. And the other dog thought that she was being attacked. I've got my hands full of groceries and I'm just going, what's going on? My wife runs out. She's separating the dogs. Long story short, they get the dogs apart. The guy's like, "Hey, listen, dogs are dogs. It happens. No problem. Nobody's cut up or anything." But my wife finally gets her back in the house. And of course, she doesn't have a collar on because she was just washing her. So she's whatever. It was a whole thing. Wife gets her back in the house and she is borderline petrified, I'll say. She's very, very scared. And she's just a mile a minute. Bah, 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 bah. And she was scared that, that this guy was going to legally come after us maybe because our dog attacked their dog, and what if their dog was injured and we didn't see it? And I was kind of taken aback and she was upset that I wasn't getting upset about this. And it made me really think about it in the moment. It's like, okay, there's nothing to fear here. There's nobody attacking us. We have no control over the situation at the moment. And that's, I think, what pissed her off more was that I wasn't getting upset, and I was just looking at her and go, you need to stop. Like I was just that far removed from the whole situation because it ended before I could even get the bags on and get out to help her, that I was able to see exactly what happened from, just that far away. But her fear took over and she was just consumed by it. And her reaction was very primal, let's say, where she was fearing us, she was fearing this guy bringing some kind of legal action maybe against us or whatever it was. And I'm like, listen, we have no control. We have no control if this guy goes home and talks to a lawyer. We have no control if this guy goes home and just chalks it up to dogs being dogs. We have no control over, the what his dog's physical state is at this point. It's over. And I kept telling her, like, you have no control over this. You need to calm down. And that pissed her off more. So what I'm getting at here with this long-winded story is that it's not just anger, but fear can also be a driving factor in our emotional responses to situations. And I think it goes back to what you were talking about with the limbic system and how it developed when we were, cavemen with saber-toothed tigers and woolly mammoths, running around trying to get us every day. It was that same kind of primal response to a situation.
The two emotions that torment men, if you will, the most are definitely anger and fear. And it's the same thing.
It is.
Oftentimes when I think about fear those are the two emotions that have gotten me in the most trouble in my life. Fear, you think a lot of the term of catastrophizing. What your wife was doing in that situation was catastrophizing the situation. She was scared that the worst case scenario was going to play out. And that same catastrophizing, which we've talked about before, comes out in so many ways. I've told my story of my background, how I was dishonest with my wife about big things, about little things for years. And the reason I was lying was out of fear. What if she doesn't like me for who I really am? What if she finds out who I really am? What if she determines that she doesn't want to be with me anymore? All of those stupid lies and stupid decisions came from that talk in my head that gave me fear. So because I was afraid, because I was simply scared to be honest and forthright and forthcoming with her, I made stupid decisions because I was scared, because of that fear, because I didn't know how to handle that fear and stare down fear. That emotion came in, going back to E+R equals O, that would happen. My reaction was generally fear, and that outcome was a marriage filled with a lot of distrust that I've been working for the last few years to rebuild because I was scared. How many men in their lives withhold information or lie or cheat or do stupid things simply out of fear?
The fear is a major driver in a lot of bad situations. Yeah. And that concept of what if. Yeah. It's something that I've definitely lived in. It's something that and it still plagues me on occasion. One thing that I've really learned to harness myself with, though, is to look at it and go, well, if that happens, then we'll deal with it. But that hasn't happened yet. So why am I worrying about it? Why am I spending mental capital? Why am I spending emotional capital and just energy dealing with a situation that hasn't occurred? Yes, there are things in the past that may be a catalyst to that occurring, and I can't change those. Right? Again, remember, I'm an engineer, I'm a very logical thinker in terms of how I do this. I can't change those things. I can change what I'm doing now and what I do in the future. So what can I do now that will help negate the negative consequences of what happened in the past, or help reduce the risk of these what ifs happening? Those are things I can do now to control the future. And those are the things that I have to concentrate on. Can't change the past. Don't know what the future holds. All I can do is contain or manage my actions in a way that I am hedging my bets as best as possible against that catastrophe from happening. And again, it's a really hard mindset to get into until you do it a few times, and then all of a sudden it starts to become second nature. it's, I go back to the example with the dogs. It was the same. I had that same reaction where it was like, okay, I can't control what just happened out in the street. I can't control how I think about it right now, how it affects my day-to-day life. And we can make changes going forward on the little things we do to make it not happen again. But I can't change the past, so it's not worth my mental capital right now. And that sounds so, when I say it out loud, it sounds so robotic. And it's, to a sense, it is. But I really feel that if more men took that mentality and didn't get hung up on the things that happened in the past, okay, your wife cheated on you. Okay, you screwed up. Okay, you were a drunk. Okay, whatever was in the past that was bad, that happened. You control from this moment forward in the way you react and the things you do to better those situations. Think about it that way. It puts a more positive spin on life. It puts you in a better headspace. And really, it keeps you from catastrophizing, just mentally replaying all that crap that happened in the past. I'm not saying forget about it. What I'm saying is don't worry about it. You can't change it. It happened. It is history. It is written in the book. You control from this moment forward and how you react to it. So you control what you do in that situation. Work on that.
That idea of control, that's something I really want to dive into, because you're right. Events happen to us. Things, for better or for worse, things are going to happen that can elicit any number of emotions: fear, anxiety, anger. They're even positive emotions. But we control how we respond. We control what we do moving forward. So, I know we've talked about a few things throughout the episode. Let's see if we can kind of sum them up into some things that you can do to kind of help control that situation and control your emotions moving forward.
Mm-hmm.
So to lead off, just like you've said, the first thing that I would always suggest you do when a negative emotion hits is to remove yourself from the situation. Right? You talked about that. I cannot reiterate that enough. Step away, leave the room if you have to, disengage. One thing I learned in jiu-jitsu that I've learned, it's kind of interesting how you learn about the parallels of life when you're going through jiu-jitsu, is I'm still really new. So, if I'm trying to pass somebody's guard, or if I am trying to take somebody's back, or whatever it looks like, and I'll throw a neck out there, or my arm will get out there, or I'll post and it'll be in a position where somebody could take advantage of it. I'm now starting to recognize that I'm leaving my neck out there. Somebody could go ahead and grab it. Somebody could grab that arm. They could knock that post out. So learning to disengage and get back from that situation. Because if I do not disengage, they're going to get my neck. I'm going to get in a guillotine. I'm going to get choked. Or they're going to get my arm in a Kimura. I'm going to tap. Get out of the situation. Get out of there immediately. And that's going to allow you to strategize to take the next step.
I think that's a strong one. It's removing yourself or not putting yourself in the situation, depending on how you want to look at it, right? Because I think a lot of what you just talked about with your jiu-jitsu scenario is you're not even allowing yourself to be put into that position anymore because you're thinking of one or two steps ahead.
Yep.
It started with, I put my neck out, and then being self-aware enough to realize I got choked because I put my neck out, right? It probably started with getting choked and going, how the hell did that happen? And then the next step was, oh, I got choked because I put my neck out. And now you're at the point where you're going, at least in some situations, I'm sure you still do it, but some situations you're going, if I make this move, it exposes my neck and I'll get choked. So I'm not going to make that move.
Well, even in between that, like there are times where I'm like, oh, my neck's out, pull back.
Right. Yeah. So, there's a step in between there too of self-realizing that you've kind of put yourself out too far and to remove yourself from that situation.
Yeah.
That's a really great example that speaks to kind of the evolution of the thought process that you're going to go through here in terms of recognizing the situation and recognizing how you can build these skills and these self-recognition capabilities of where you are in a situation and how to reduce the potential for danger, I guess is the best way to look at it.
Yeah.
The next step after removing yourself from the situation is understanding that you can't control the past. You can't control what has already occurred. You can't change it, rather. You can control what you do forward. So building on your jiu-jitsu example, right? You can't control if somebody's got you in a certain position. What you can control is your response to it and your moves to either better your position or put them in a worse position. I'm probably a little over my skis in terms of my jujitsu knowledge or this metaphor, but I think it works in the sense that you're not able to, we can't time travel. We can't go back and be like, you know what, I shouldn't have gotten to that argument with my wife. You know what, I shouldn't have come home drunk. I shouldn't have whatever stupid shit we all do. But I can control from this moment forward how I react and how I better myself to both react when those situations occur, if it's something that if it's something that I didn't do, or change myself, better myself so that I don't do those things again. So I think about a situation where, let's say you're married and you've got a wife who just, when she comes at you hard, and then you have a similar response and you just get into these knockout, drag out fights. You can't necessarily change the way your wife acts, but you can change your reaction to it. You can learn to disengage. You can learn to stay calm. You can learn to just explain to her that you're not going to have these conversations when she's in such an emotional state, which be careful with that one. That's a tough one, but you can learn not to have an equally devastating emotional response. Vice versa. If you're the kind of person who does something that is detrimental to your life, whether it's like, I keep going back to drinking or to watching porn or whatever it is, you can learn to not remove those things from your life, as hard as they may be, so that they don't have the detrimental effects downstream after you've done them. So
Yeah.
That's probably the next step, is just that self-awareness and that ability to react accordingly.
Yeah. That self-awareness piece is really big. You can't control what's happened. You might have made a bad decision. You might have had an outburst while acted while you were in the middle of your emotion and processing it. You cannot allow that to dictate your plan moving forward.
Yep.
And from there, one of the biggest things that we need to talk about is making restitution. It's something that when you get mad at your wife, when you have a bad situation, going back to that conversation that I had with that guy where he was acting emotionally, I felt drawn in, and I kind of responded to him in a way. It's like, and I said, I know you feel this way. I understand that. And that's fine that you feel this way. There are obviously some things I could have done better, and I'm sorry for that. I'm genuinely sorry that there were things that we could have done better that caused you to feel this way. And that allowed him to come back and say, yeah, you're right. I'm sorry as well. Making restitution, recognizing your fault, and then acknowledging that to the other party is really big. If you're filled with fear, if you're filled with anger, you have to obviously do what you can to make some sort of restitution and make it right by communicating. Maybe you didn't do anything wrong. Maybe you're mad at somebody maybe you're feeling frustrated or angry with somebody because they did something that offended or hurt you. You don't owe them an apology, but at the same time, you need to communicate to them how you feel. That communication piece is what enables you to grow and not necessarily be stagnant because you're trying to process these things alone. That recognition piece is vital. It's critical in a marriage. You cannot be scared, angry, sad, anxious in any situation with your wife without letting her know how you feel.
This is the part that I'm the worst at. Saying I'm sorry or owning a part of the issue. I can think through things logically. I can remove myself from the situation. I can identify ways that I need to change. But going back and taking ownership of a situation is probably one of the hardest things one of the things I have the hardest time doing. And thinking on it right now, it's probably because I feel like by admitting even partial fault, I'm letting that other person off the hook. And that's an emotional response that, absolutely I should own whatever I did wrong. And the the asshole in me wants to go, listen, I'm sorry for this. I did this and this and this wrong. But that doesn't excuse blah, blah, blah. That's obviously not the right way to go, right? It's simply, you're 100% right. It's just owning your part of the problem. If the other person can't have the self-realization that they also own part of the problem, that's on them. That's not for you to point out. And it's something that I know personally I always want to do, because I have to be right. I have to be that's a personal flaw that I have. So it's an important step, to your point, especially in a marriage. And it's also one of the toughest things for me to do personally.
Yeah.
So,
It feels
and
really good.
I want to live in integrity here with this situation a little bit too. It's, we're giving you guys a lot of good information, a lot of good ways to handle these situations. I'll be the first one to tell you that I am not the best at doing this all the time. Emotion still gets the best of me. It still is something that it will win on occasion. Anyone who knows my wife, she will tell you that I've gotten better with arguments, but I have not gotten to the point where they're all neat and clean and taken care of in this way. This is an ongoing process, and it will be an ongoing process for you.
Yeah. The coming back to but, it feels really good to dunk on people.
Oh yeah.
There's something about it that feels very satisfying. But to what end? What do you really stand to gain from that? In the moment, it feels great, but coming back to E+R equals O, what's that outcome really going to look like when the dust settles?
Yeah.
And something to what you were saying, emotions get the best of me all the time. We're not ever going to sit here and pretend like we've got it figured out. But one other thing I do want to address that is worthwhile is what I like to call preventative maintenance when it comes to emotions. Within the Iron Council, we focus on various quadrants, to really improve yourself. And the way in which you live your life, you could argue, boils down to 4 key tenets. And one of them is something called calibration. It's getting right with yourself. I look at this, the way I interpret calibration and the way that I try to approach it is getting my mind as calm as possible. That to me is preventative maintenance, because when I am calm and when I am right, I can recognize those emotions bubbling up, and I can be a lot more tactical in saying, okay, these strategies of stepping away, getting away from the situation, acknowledging it, forgetting, letting go of the past, all these things we talked about. It's much easier for me to do if I'm right mentally. And getting right mentally looks different for different guys. For a lot of guys, it's working out. I know you and I both enjoy shooting our bows. That to me is very therapeutic, and it's good for me mentally. A lot of guys will do cold showers, or they'll meditate or journal or read. What that looks like is different for different guys, but that preventative maintenance piece is really critical of getting your head right so that when something happens, you're that much more prepared to be able to handle it appropriately.
I would argue as well that preventive maintenance in your relationships is important.
Yeah.
Right. We talk a lot about our wives here and our relationships with our wives, but it goes with your kids or at work or wherever. When those invariable blowups occur, if you've put the time in ahead of time, it will have a less detrimental effect when you have an emotional response, or even when the other person has an emotional response. It's a lot like a bank account, right? Like if you keep depositing and depositing and depositing, when you withdraw a little bit with these emotional responses, and it's not a permission slip to have them, but they're gonna happen. Like life happens. We're talking more about reducing the damage that occurs when they happen than anything else here. But when those events happen, if you've been banking and depositing into those relationships, it's going to be a lot less detrimental than if you're not investing. So I think about my kids, like I've mentioned a bunch of times before, I got 2 teenage daughters at this point, right? I've put a lot of time in with them up to this point, and I know that the next few years are going to be a struggle. And my hope is that all the deposits I've made up to this point maintain us through this rough patch that's going to occur. They're going to have emotional responses for sure. I'm sure I'm not going to respond in the best way all the time, but put in so much ahead of time that I think we can weather the storm. It's the same with your wife. It's the same with your employees at work. It's the same with your boss. It's the same with your buddies, right? The more we put into that bank, the more we can manage and weather these rough seas and still maintain the relationships. It sounds very transactional when I say it that way, but it's true. It's about building things up and shoring them up so that when the shitty times happen, they aren't a complete catastrophe.
That's accurate. That goes back to why we put money in an account to begin with.
Right.
Is to prepare ourselves for the invariable chaos that ensues.
It was a good episode. It was, it definitely took a couple of left turns that I wasn't expecting. I'm glad we were able to talk through that.
Yeah.
I think that the guys will take a lot from this. Like I said in the beginning, this is more strategic than it was tactical. We didn't give you the 5 ways to fix your emotional response or anything like that. But what we did give you was a few strong ideas of how to remove yourself from the situation, think through it logically, and re-engage with a better, more level-headed approach that in the end is going to bring you to the best result possible. And remember, I'll harp on it. I think it's a great tool. E+R equals O. Event plus reaction equals outcome. You don't control the event. You have a desired outcome. Your reaction is what's going to get you there. So we appreciate all you guys listening. Make sure you come back next week. We've got a couple of good episodes lined up here. In the meantime, please leave us a rating and review in your podcast player and check us out on Instagram. You can find all of our social media on our website, untamingmasculinity.com. You'll also find show notes for this and other shows. And until next week, we'll leave you with just one question. What are you doing to untame your masculinity?